Ready to step off the map from the most hidden alleyways to the stories nobody told you? Uncharted Alleyways begins now. Your definitive guide and travel podcast, culture, adventure, and the world as you've never heard it. Tune in, disconnect from the obvious, and come explore with us. Uncharted Alleyways, your next trip starts here.
Imagine standing in a single room where you can just, trace the rise and fall of three separate world empires just by looking at the architectural layers on the walls.
Pretty wild to think about.
Yeah, it really is. So today, for you listening, we are actually leaving the quiet, pastel-colored fishing harbors of the Greek islands for a city where two continents literally collide.
Physically crash right into each other.
Exactly. We are taking the travelogue notes provided in our source material, Uncharted Alleyways, and we are heading straight to Istanbul, Turkey. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We're looking at a massive, sprawling metropolis that, well, it isn't some museum where history is just kept perfectly preserved and roped off behind glass.
No, definitely not.
Right, it's like this massive ancient tapestry that millions of people are actively weaving and altering and just using every single day.
I mean, to truly grasp how a city becomes the beating heart of the Roman, the Byzantines, and the Ottoman empires, you really have to strip away the buildings and look at the raw geography.
The actual land it sits on.
Exactly. Istanbul is the only major city on Earth physically split across two continents. You have Europe on the western side, Asia on the eastern side.
And they are sliced right down the middle, right?
Yeah, by this sparkling, naturally deep waterway called the Bosphorus Strait. And that physical layout isn't just, a picturesque backdrop. It is a massive geographic choke point.
Because if you control that water, you control everything.
Right. For thousands of years, whoever controlled that specific narrow strip of water controlled the flow of wealth, goods, and armies between the East and the West. Geography is destiny here, and it dictated that this location would be a center of global power.
Wow, geography is destiny. I love that. But, you don't just parachute into the Byzantine era to see that power today.
Oh, no, you definitely don't.
Right, because to access that ancient history now, you first have to push through an incredibly intense modern reality. I mean, you land at an airport that operates on just a mind-boggling scale.
It's essentially a self-sustaining miniature city.
Processing millions of people moving everywhere. And from there, you immediately face a choice. Like, do you brave the notorious gridlocked surface traffic, or do you dive underground into the metro system?
And then breaking the surface into the city proper is just a total sensory overload.
Oh, completely. You've got endless blocks of modern apartment buildings, and piercing right through them are these minarets.
The tall towers attached to the mosque.
Yeah, where the call to prayer echoes out across the neighborhoods. And you've got delivery scooters aggressively weaving around street vendors.
Guys pushing carts stacked high with simit, right?
Yes, those warm, circular rings of bread crusted in toasted sesame seeds. And the smell of grilled meat mixes with sea air and exhaust fumes. It is incredibly loud.
And fast-paced.
Yes.
Super fast.
But what's fascinating here is that constant forward-moving friction is exactly what prevents Istanbul from falling into a trap.
A trap? What do you mean?
Well, the trap that captures so many other historic cities, places like Venice or Kyoto, often run the risk of becoming sort of frozen in time. Oh, where the modern economy is entirely subservient to preserving the past.
Exactly, preserving this pristine image. But Istanbul operates completely differently. Modern life doesn't pause respectfully at the borders of a 1,500-year-old ruin.
It just builds right on top of it.
Yeah, right on top. People commute, trade, and live their fast-paced modern lives directly in the shadow of ancient monuments. The city functions because it refuses to be a museum.
Okay, I get that dynamic. But I have to push back a bit on the romance of all that chaos.
Fair enough.
I mean, if I'm a visitor and I'm, dodging delivery scooters and navigating this intense sensory overload, how do I actually stop to appreciate the historical weight of a millennium-old building?
Without getting run over, you mean?
Exactly. Like, how do you take it all in?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at how city planners over the centuries compartmentalize the urban space.
Oh, so they designed breaks in the chaos.
Right. When you need to physically step back and take in the sheer scale of the history, you head to the Sultanahmet district. This was the imperial core.
So it's very different from the commercial streets you just mentioned.
Completely. Sultanahmet is defined by its negative space. There are wide, tree-lined walkways, massive public squares, and fountains.
They engineered a buffer zone.
Yes, the emperors deliberately built it so that when you approach these monuments, you are forced to look up and feel the immensity of the architecture.
And looking up in Sultanahmet means looking straight at the Hagia Sophia.
An absolute marvel.
Completed in the year 537, which is just hard to wrap your head around. It started as an enormous Christian cathedral, eventually became a mosque, then a museum, and today it functions as a mosque again.
While still letting in visitors, yeah.
The interior scale just sounds impossible. You have sunlight filtering through high windows onto golden Christian mosaics that shimmer right next to massive, elegant black medallions covered in Islamic calligraphy.
It is visually stunning.
But here's what I don't get. Why keep both? When a conquering empire takes over a city, don't they usually tear down the old monuments to show who's boss?
That is the standard historical playbook, yes. But here you really have to look at the psychology of conquest.
Okay, how so?
Well, the Ottomans recognize a crucial architectural truth, which is that appropriation is vastly more powerful than destruction. By converting the grandest cathedral in the world into their own imperial mosque rather than tearing it down, they absorbed the entire Byzantine legacy.
Into their own power structure.
Exactly. They didn't erase the past, they physically layered their present right over it. That is why the Hagia Sophia's identity transcends any single era. It's an active ledger of human ambition.
Wow. And then standing right across the square from it, you have a monument built specifically to rival that ambition.
The Blue Mosque.
Visually, it just dominates the skyline with 6 incredibly slender minarets. And inside, the walls are covered in thousands of hand-painted blue Iznik tiles.
Those tiles are what give the entire cavernous interior this soft, ethereal blue glow.
It sounds incredible. Visitors have to enter outside of prayer times, wear modest clothing, and just maintain quiet respect.
It's a masterpiece of light and tile work, for sure.
It sounds like a space where, regardless of your personal beliefs, the sheer scale of the artistry forces you into a state of reverence.
Absolutely. But, just a stone's throw from both those colossal houses of worship is the seat of temporal political power.
Topkapı Palace.
Right. For generations, this was the epicenter of the Ottoman Empire. However, visitors expecting a European-style palace.
Like Versailles or Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, those massive, imposing, single blocks of stone. People are often completely caught off guard by the layout here.
Because it's not one big building.
Topkapı is a sprawling, decentralized network of courtyards, lush gardens, and standalone pavilions.
Which seems wildly inefficient to me for an administrative center running an empire. Why build it spread out like a campus?
Because architecture always reflects cultural DNA. The Ottomans emerged from a nomadic, tent-dwelling heritage in Central Asia.
Oh, so they translated that into stone.
Exactly. When they settled and built an empire, they essentially translated that nomadic encampment into permanent stone and marble.
So the layout is a luxurious version of a chieftain's camp.
Yes. The Sultan could move between pavilions just as his ancestors moved between tents. And from those terraces, he could look directly out over the Bosphorus and physically watch the wealth of the world sailing past his front door.
Okay, that makes total sense. They hardwired their nomadic roots into the imperial architecture.
They really did.
But you can't have sprawling imperial palaces and massive monuments operating above ground without a massive power source to keep everything running.
Right, the infrastructure.
So if the imperial palaces were the motherboard of the empire, the Basilica Cistern was the massive lithium battery buried deep underground.
A battery of water, exactly.
Storing the vital energy needed to keep the whole system from crashing.
Because the ancient world required immense hydraulic engineering to sustain populations of this size, especially during periods of drought or military sieges. So they built this vast subterranean reservoir beneath the streets of Istanbul to store and pump water directly into the imperial buildings. The water was actually brought in via aqueducts from a forest over 12 miles away.
And stepping into it today sounds like entering a different dimension.
It is. You leave the blazing summer heat and the noise of the modern city, and you walk down into this cool, silent cavern.
Filled with perfectly still water mirroring hundreds of softly lit stone columns. It functions almost like the city's subconscious mind.
Dark, quiet, and dreamlike.
Holding up the loud, conscious chaos on the surface. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
I am completely hung up on what is sitting in the dark at the very back of this cistern. There are 2 enormous stone heads of Medusa the mythical gorgon with snakes for hair, sieving as the base blocks for 2 of the columns.
It's such a striking detail.
But one head is completely upside down and the other is turned sideways. So I can't tell if the Byzantine engineers were just being lazy and recycling old stone, or if I'm missing some grand superstitious symbolism here.
Well, you've hit on a cold case that historians and archaeologists still aggressively debate.
Wait, really?
Yeah. There is the pragmatic camp, which argues exactly what you suggested. Early builders were just incredibly practical.
Utilitarian recycling.
Right. They needed a specific height for the column support, scavenged these massive carved heads from a ruined Roman temple, and placing them sideways or upside down simply gave them the flat surface they needed.
But I'm guessing, there has to be a more dramatic theory, right?
Absolutely. The symbolic camp argues that in the pagan world, a Gorgon's gaze turned men to stone.
Okay.
So by purposefully inverting the heads and submerging them in water, the Byzantine builders, who were early Christians, were performing a deliberate symbolic act.
To strip the old pagan gods of their power.
Exactly. You turn the monster upside down to neutralize its curse and ward off evil spirits from the city's water supply.
That is fascinating.
And we simply don't know the truth, which transforms a piece of ancient municipal infrastructure into an enduring psychological puzzle.
I love that the ambiguity is just baked right into the foundations of the city. So we've got the political center, and we've got the subterranean infrastructure sustaining it.
But none of this happens without massive amounts of capital.
Right. All that imperial grandeur was funded by the fact that Istanbul monopolized the trade routes between Asia and Europe. And to understand how that wealth actually changed hands, you have to dive into the Grand Bazaar.
The Grand Bazaar is often described as one of the oldest and largest covered markets in the world, but it is more accurate to think of it as a fortified economic engine.
It's a sprawling maze of winding, vaulted passageways lined with thousands of shops.
And they're selling everything you can imagine.
Carpets, ceramics, incredibly intricate lanterns, jewelry, leather goods. But the detail that really stands out isn't the sheer volume of inventory, it's the required ritual of buying it.
This raises an important question about how we view commerce in the modern world versus historically.
Because it is completely expected that a shopkeeper will invite you inside, sit you down, and offer you a small, tulip-shaped glass of hot tea before you ever discuss a price.
Bargaining is a friendly conversation, not a battle.
Exactly.
And that culture of hospitality wasn't developed just to be polite. It was a highly calculated business tactic.
Because they were dealing with traders who traveled for months, right?
Across dangerous continents, yes. So the tea, the small talk, the hospitality, that established trust. And trust was the only currency that mattered when you were negotiating deals on the most high-value, volatile commodities of the ancient world.
Buying something in the Grand Bazaar is a social contract.
Not merely a transaction precisely.
But think about the stark contrast between that and how you and I live today. We are entirely conditioned by one-click online shopping.
Right, it's so impersonal.
You see a picture of a rug, you click a button, and a box shows up on your porch 2 days later. You literally never speak to a human being or look anyone in the eye.
It's a completely isolated experience.
Isn't it wild that in the Grand Bazaar, you are practically required to sit down, sip hot tea, and forge a genuine human connection just to buy a souvenir lantern?
It forces you to be present in the exchange. And, if you want to see where the real high-stakes trading happened, the specific commodities that actually shaped global economies, you have to follow the scent down the street.
To the Spice Bazaar.
Yes.
Long before you even step through the arched brick entrances of the Spice Bazaar, the aromas just hit you. Saffron, sumac, fragrant herbal teas, dried fruits, nuts, and towering mountains of Turkish delight.
It is a total sensory explosion.
The displays are meticulously arranged in these bright, colorful pyramids, and the vendors are highly insistent that you taste different varieties of dried fruit right there in the aisle.
Because when you walk through the Spice Bazaar, you are physically smelling and tasting the very goods that motivated the Silk Road.
The demand for those exact spices is what drove European explorers to desperately search for new sea routes to the east.
Which, as a byproduct, accidentally led to the discovery of the Americas.
All of that global momentum was driven by the desire to bypass the trade monopoly held right here in Istanbul's markets.
It all comes back to the geography. The city sits on the ultimate continental choke point.
And the source notes emphasize that to truly synthesize everything we've talked about today, you have to step back and view that geography from the water. Taking the Bosphorus ferry isn't just a scenic tourist activity.
It's the physical realization of the city's entire history. The ferries are a vital, highly efficient, and inexpensive pillar of the public transit network.
But they provide a vantage point that is impossible to replicate from the streets.
Right, because the Bosphorus itself is not a lazy river. It is a powerful, treacherous maritime highway with intense currents connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean.
So you sit on the deck, the ferry pulls away from the dock, and you just watch 1,500 years of history slide past.
You see the sprawling layout of Topkapı Palace.
The massive domes of the mosques, the modern high-rises, little waterfront cafes. You've got seagulls pacing the boat, hovering right over the deck because passengers are tossing them pieces of that sesame summit bread.
It's incredibly cinematic.
But the most mind-bending part is the commute itself. In a matter of minutes, you travel by boat from Europe to Asia. It's exactly like taking your normal morning commuter bus, except this bus is literally crossing continental tectonic plates.
And what is truly remarkable is that even the locals, the people who make that exact crossing every single Tuesday morning to get to the office, they still pause, step out onto the open deck, and admire the view.
They don't take it for granted.
No, the sheer majesty of that crossing never becomes mundane. It is a daily, physical reminder of why their city has been fought over, conquered, and cherished by empires for millennia.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, taking this in today? We've pushed through the chaotic, modern arrival of a metropolis bursting at the seams.
We've stood in Sultanahmet looking up at monumental architecture that absorbed rather than destroyed its past.
We've gone underground into the dark, battery-like reservoir of the Basilica Cistern to debate the mystery of Medusa heads.
We've learned that a cup of tea in the Grand Bazaar is actually an ancient economic tool.
And we've taken a commuter ferry across continental divides.
The core insight to take away from all this is that true history isn't static.
It isn't a textbook that was finished and closed centuries ago.
Right. Istanbul proves that a city could fiercely honor its ancient roots, preserving the layered legacy of three distinct empires, while simultaneously charging forward at a chaotic, hypermodern, and deeply functional pace.
It is an active, living tapestry. But before we wrap up, our deep dive into the source material drops a really fascinating hint about what lies ahead. We've spent all this time today talking about emperors, sultans, monumental architecture, and the grand sweep of global trade.
The big historical strokes, yeah.
The notes suggest that the city's true personality might actually lie far beyond the palaces and the tourist trails. It hints at the quiet neighborhood cafes, the localized daily routines.
And especially the incredibly well-fed stray cats and dogs.
Yes, that locals fiercely protect and cherish on the streets. It makes you wonder, is a city's soul truly defined by the massive, immovable monuments built by its emperors, or is it defined by the daily, fleeting routines of its ordinary and sometimes four-legged residents?
Great question.
Something to mull over the next time you find yourself wandering through a new city.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.